大家好, 여러분, 안녕하세요, minasan, konnichiwa. Today is the 22nd of December 2024, and this is my 8th weekly update, right? So let's jump right into what I did and didn't manage to do this week, right? Well, last week, right? So for Chinese, I plan to have 2 hours of italki lessons. Unfortunately, one of my teachers was busy this week, so I wasn't able to schedule any lessons this week with her. But I did manage to do 1 hour of lessons with my other teacher, right? I wanted to do Lingqiu for Chinese this week. I have not been able to do anything, right? So one interesting thing that I wanted to share was actually I wanted to share the notes that my Chinese teacher on italki does for me, right? So how our lesson goes every week is that it pretty much is a freestyle situation where she will ask me about things that I am doing or have been doing in my life and relevant questions around the period, right, that we're in, right? So maybe now's the end of the year. She might ask me about, what am I doing for Christmas? How is Christmas celebrated in my country? These sort of questions. So relevant, I would think, like pretty relevant questions, like things that you might actually talk to someone about in Chinese, right? So while we were having our conversation, this is an example of words that will just come up in the conversation, which we'll expand on. So, for example, the 20th vocabulary that we learned during the lesson was 节制日期, which is a deadline, right? So, and then during class itself, she'll just write out the Chinese characters and then the pinyin, right? And then after class, I don't know if she uses AI or something, but she will produce a very nice document, right? Which gives explanation of the vocabulary that we have learned, right? So, 保质期, right? So this is for, it's like a deadline, but for food, right? Validity period, 有效期, right? So period during which a document or permission is valid, So because we're talking about deadlines, we talked about other sorts of vocabulary that we can talk about, similar kind of expiry deadline situations. So that's why we came up with shelf life and validity period, right? So after validity period, we're talking about, okay, what are examples of things with validity periods, right? And then after that came out the vocabulary 23 and 24, which would be 签证, visa, and 保险, right? So insurance, right? So yeah, I just wanted to share to make my weekly review a bit more interesting. These were some vocabulary that I learned this week. I'm probably going to forget a lot of things. I would say 节制日期 is probably pretty important and useful. I feel, like one of the things I feel about Mandarin is that you could probably simplify things or speak about them in a roundabout way that people would probably understand what you're saying. So I'll give an example, right? So maybe you don't know how to say the shelf life, so 保质期, right? So if you're asking about what's the shelf life of, maybe bread, right? So there's this bread that you're trying to buy. You're asking, you want to ask, when's the last date that you have to use this by, right? When's the 保质期, right? But you forgot about it, right? So you could probably say, 这个面包节制日期几天, right? So in a very simple way, you could say, what's the deadline of the bread, right? And in a very professional situation, it sounds completely strange, right? But I would imagine that in a everyday situation, people are gonna realize that, okay, you're probably a foreigner, right? And you're asking for the expiry date, right? So, in situations like this, people would probably just tell you what is the expiry date, or they would re-clarify to say, oh, 截至日期，你是在问保质期吗？ Right? And then, if you don't know what is 保质期, you'll be like, what? But, I would say you'll probably be able to get the answer with 截至日期, right? As the most generalized, well, in my understanding of the vocabulary, the most generalized way to ask for the end of a period, right? So yeah, right. Yeah. So 截至日期 is probably something I would probably remember, whereas 保质期 or 小期 might be a bit more difficult for me to remember, right? And how often would you use 签证, right, for visa, right? So 签证 is another word that is gonna be difficult for me to remember, but I'll try my best. Whereas I think 保险, right, insurance is actually somewhat common, right? Well, I feel more common than 签证 or 有效期 in daily life, but I don't know. Just me rambling on. Right. So yeah. So this is actually what my Chinese teacher, one of my Chinese teachers, does for me, and how we have our lesson, right? So I feel that I do try my best to absorb as much vocabulary, because I feel that a lot of the conversations that we're having are actually very realistic conversations that I could be having, right? So, and all these vocabulary make things easier to have conversation, right? So yeah, that's Chinese. For Korean, I did 1 hour of an italki lesson. I also did Pimsleur level 2, lesson 1, right? So maybe my next lesson for Korean, I might do some recording, right? And then maybe I can play it, or to show how my Korean lesson goes. It's a bit different from my Chinese lessons, right? So that might be interesting to talk about. I have started Pimsleur level 2, lesson 1. I would have to say I'm not so sure if this is a mental it's just in my mind, right? But I'm feeling that level 2, lesson 1 feels more difficult, right? So what I mean by that is that when I'm doing level 2, lesson 1 for Pimsleur Korean, I need to focus a lot more than when I was doing level 1, right? So the level 1 content, I pretty much could sort of just breeze through it and get, I understand everything, right? But level 2 is getting a bit more mentally demanding, right? So Japanese, I did do my 5 episodes of Subtanime. I did do 3 lessons of Pimsleur Japanese, so I did finish lesson 20, 21, and 22, right? Of level 1, right? So, and also, last week's plan, totally did not do it, right? So, we'll see how things goes this week. But, being that this week's Christmas, I am going to imagine that I'm not going to be able to get this done. Right, so this week's plan, 2 hours of italki lessons. I would say that actually Chinese is probably the easiest italki lessons for me to do. Mainly because I do understand most of what we are conversing about during class. So my hesitation is much lower going into this class. I don't need to be as mentally prepared, right, for Korean or even Japanese when I was taking Japanese classes, right? So that's I suppose the good thing about my Chinese is that I don't feel so apprehensive about taking italki lessons, right? So, and also another good thing is that both my teachers for Chinese are available usually whenever I need to take classes, right? So, yeah, so that's pretty convenient for me, right? That I could probably schedule classes like the next day, right? So let's say it's the night before, right? Let's say I want to take a class at like 9 a.m. in the morning the next day. If I schedule the class before 9 p.m. the day before, my teachers would probably be able to accept my class, and I'll be able to just wake up the next day, do the lesson. That's an example, right, of how things are easy logistically for me to take classes, right? This week I'll try to do LingQ. I might explain how I'm doing it in the next week's update, but yeah, okay. Korean, okay. 1 hour of an italki lesson might be difficult because I have because Christmas is happening this week, right? So a bit of a busy week this week, but we'll see how it goes. I will try to schedule it in, but that being said, my teacher might be busy as well, so we'll see. I'll try to do and complete lesson 2, level 2. Should be doable considering it's just one lesson, right? For Japanese, watching subbed anime 5 episodes a week, pretty easy for me, right? I will try to do. I wrote 3 lessons, but I meant to say 1 lesson of level 1, lesson 23, right? The reason why I'm kind of giving myself a bit of lower workload this week, less workload this week, is because it is Christmas and I already know that I have certain social obligations this week, right? And if I do have time, hopefully this weekend, right? Hopefully this weekend I can make a video about the different levels of my Chinese, Japanese, and Korean. And I think that would probably be a pretty interesting video for people that are interested in my content so far, right? So yeah, so that's the end of this week's update. I'll try to be productive during this week of Christmas, but I'm not too hopeful about that. But we'll see how it goes. Anyway, that's the end of today's video. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Okay, goodbye.